our climate announcement. Now, we're not here to bag other political parties, but we do have to start with the context of where we're at, okay, on climate change. And the fact is it's not good, okay? We have a situation where the government is telling us that we are middle of the pack. You know, that we are, you know, we're average in the class at the 1500 metres, okay? But the fact is this, that's what the government's telling you. Here's the reality. We did nothing after the starting gun shot. We were one of those kids that tied their shoelaces, had a few sips at the water bottle, maybe took off to the tuck shop for a little while. Finally, it's come to the last lap, and we've realised we've done nothing, and we're throwing ourselves down on the ground, pounding it and crying, saying it's too hard. We've done nothing, and now we're crying poor that we can't do what we need to do. So, when the government says we're pulling our weight, it's not the case. We had made some promises to reduce emissions to where they were in 1990 by 2012, okay? And then we made a promise to reduce them by 5% below that in 2020, and now 11% below that in 2030. What have we done? 25% increase over that time, okay? So when the government says, oh, we're different, oh, it costs us more to reduce emissions, it's because we've done nothing up until now. And when they say we've met our international commitments, it's not because we've reduced emissions. It's because we've relied on a bunch of forests that were planted during the 1990s, before this whole climate change agreement came about. Who invested in one of those forests? A lot of us did, because there were good tax breaks to do so at the time. Didn't work out well. But they have actually saved our backside when it came to our climate change agreements. The other way we've met our international targets is by buying fraudulent credits out of the Ukraine and Russia. Now, by the time everyone realised this scam was going on, New Zealand was the only country left down the back alleyway of carbon credits, buying off Boris, the Ukrainian, back alley salesperson. We were the only ones there. And per capita, we have gorged on those fraudulent foreign credits more than any other country in the world. Okay? So it's an absolute disgrace how we have met our international commitments. And it's not been because we've done anything, because we haven't done anything. So that's the background. Now, we have signed up to the Paris Agreement, and the implication of that, if you, looking at the consensus on the science, is that we have to get to zero carbon by 2050. Okay? We'll put agriculture to one side for a moment, because that is more difficult and it is a different case. But we have to get off fossil fuels by 2050. Net zero carbon, okay? So that means if we have to use a little bit of fossil fuels in 2050, that's okay as long as we're planting trees or sucking that carbon out of the atmosphere somehow. But we have to get off this fossil fuel addiction by 2050. That's the bottom line. And the government, again, has no plan to do that. There is no plan. So like I said, we're here. We've got to get to here by 2030, and basically we have to get all the way down here by 2050, and we're up here. So we need a plan for action, and it's got to be fast. So here's the top plan, very briefly. You can find more detail on our website, top.org.nz/top6, because it's our sixth policy. Logical, if nothing else. Okay. First up, we've got to restore the integrity of the emissions trading scheme. The emissions trading scheme is the number one tool that we have as a country to achieve our targets. Okay? Now, I'm happy to talk more about the emissions trading scheme if you have questions about it. It isn't a simple thing, that's fair, but the point is we put a decent price on the emission of carbon. Okay, we get a good price on it, and it'll give people an incentive to reduce emissions, or give people a good incentive to plant trees or find other ways of taking emissions out of the atmosphere. So we have to restore the integrity of the emissions trading scheme. The way we do that is by dumping those junk credits we bought in the first place, number one. Number two, we stay closed to international trade until we know it's a decent situation. And we think the emissions trading scheme should stay closed indefinitely. And if we have to trade internationally to buy our way out of our targets, the government should do it.
I just say he means trade in carbon.
Yeah. Thanks, G. We need a Zero Carbon Act, just like the UK has, to make sure that we have a plan ongoingly. Each year, the government in the UK gets a report card, how you've done on carbon this year, Johnny. Or it's Teresa now, isn't it? Teresa, here's how you've done on carbon this year, Teresa. You've got an A here and a B here, whatever. And so the government is kept to account in that way. The upshot of what we're talking about is that the carbon price will rise. We'll get rid of the ceiling on carbon, and you'll see it rise significantly in coming years. It's hard to know how much because it depends how many trees get planted. But we want to have a go at meeting our climate change commitments within our own country through our own actions first, rather than sending money offshore, overseas, when we've been giving it to criminals in the past. How are we going to use the revenue that will generate? Because of course the government will sell carbon credits and will generate revenue. So there's two ways that we will spend this money. And these are, by the way, both things that we should be doing anyway. Okay? So the first thing is energy efficiency. New Zealand is terrible at energy efficiency, even though it would save us money. It would make us money. It would save our power bills in our homes, and it would cut costs for businesses. There is money lying around on the ground, but we don't do it. Why? Come on, you guys have got Scottish ancestry. You should know. It's because we're tight. All right? Kiwis are tight. We don't like the upfront costs to save us money a few years down the line. So we're going to plough this money into... Did anyone get involved in the Warm Up New Zealand scheme where you got home insulation? Some people got that? Yeah. So think of that on steroids. But for homes and for businesses, small businesses, helping them all become more efficient. Use their energy more efficiently, save money and cut their carbon emissions at the same time. This is exactly what the Business Green Growth Group suggested back in 2011, and the government said, nah. Okay, so there is huge amounts of money that we can actually make here. We can make our country more prosperous and cut emissions at the same time. The other big thing is planting erosion-prone land. New Zealand has 1.1 million hectares, that's 5% of the country, of erosion-prone land. It's not making much money from the sheep and beef. Every time you cut down a tree that's on it, the soil ends up in the rivers and in the ocean. We're losing soil, we're stuffing our rivers, when actually all this land should just have forest on it. Forest on it that could be earning us carbon credits, saving the soil and saving our water at the same time. We should be doing it regardless, but we're not. So that's the other major area that we'll invest in. The other thing that we have to do is make sure that our long-term investments make sense, because some investments we make now will be still around past 2050. Okay? So we have to make sure our homes are more energy efficient, because they're getting built now and they'll be around post 2050. We have to put funding for transport on an equal playing field between trains, shipping and cars. At the moment, all of the money goes into cars, and we're not saying necessarily more should go into trains and shipping, but that when these decisions are made, we should be looking at each on its merits and putting the money where it makes the most economic sense. Now, we haven't talked much about agriculture, and like I said, That is mostly taken care of in our water policy, which is incredibly stringent, and we're happy to talk about that later on. That's the first stage for improving agriculture. But all the stuff that we have proposed under our agricultural policy, under our freshwater policy, will actually reduce carbon emissions in agriculture anyway. And the last point is on this adaptation. And this is the real reason that we are releasing this policy in Dunedin. Because you guys, South Dunedin in particular, is at the forefront of the challenges of sea level rise. Okay, now the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment has worked out that there are 9,000 homes that are at threat before 2050 in New Zealand. That's a Christchurch-sized red zone, right? That is a disaster waiting to happen that is completely predictable. And we're not all talking about $1 million beachfront batches that we can just sort of say, oh, you know, don't worry about the rich pricks. We are talking about, in the case of South Dunedin, we are talking about people's only asset. And that's, South Dunedin is probably one of the areas that's most at risk in the next few decades. What we're suggesting at the Opportunities Party is that the government needs to be at the table with local authorities and local communities working out the solutions. What's going to be the plan of action in these areas? Because otherwise, we're just going to wait until the disaster happens, and what will happen then? Well, just like what happened in Christchurch, the government will swoop in and help everyone. So let's admit that we're going to be doing that anyway, and get in there and start having those conversations now to try and prevent these disasters before they actually happen. That's our climate change policy. So, thanks.